You are in the room with Removing Our Blinders, and I am Debbie Nelson with Together SC. I have the honor really of creating a lot of the content that we deliver from Together SC through our many programs and our annual summit, and that's the job and the hat I wear. But one of the things I'd love to share with you today, it's a big day, it's December 1st, and why it's a big day for me is it's been a goal for a long time. Today, registration opens for the 2022 summit. Yay, Lizzie, thanks for applauding, but it is a labor of love pulling this together, and I would invite all of you to go to our website and click on the summit button to find out what's going to be going on March 9th, 10th, and 11th in Spartanburg. We have a great program planned. The urgency of now is our theme, and we are wanting CEOs and board members and everyone on your team to be part of this summit. And I say that lovingly, also knowing that we're in the midst of a COVID pandemic, and I don't know if you want to call it the midst, but we still want to be as safe as we possibly can in March, not knowing what the conditions will be. And so this summit will be a little smaller. We are going to have less people there to be able to ensure some distancing in the event space. And so I encourage you, if you're interested in coming to the summit, register as early as possible, because it really will have much less capacity than we have in years past. But please go to the summit website, learn more about the event. We will be putting more content in, right, Alex? I'm looking at you. Alex is my partner in crime, collecting all the content, but we'll be adding content every day. But right now, there's a great framework for you to see what is going to be going on in March in Spartanburg. So that's my big shout out of the day. But the other role I serve today is moderating this really important session on removing our blinders. I am really proud of Together SC that over the last year, we have hosted these sessions each month. And each month we invite a white leader or white leaders to come and share about their personal journeys and their organizational journeys around the topic of race, white privilege, racial equity. And these are really vulnerable, transparent conversations that I applaud the folks that have been doing this for us and being willing to open up and share with all of you. Because I really think that by doing that, it gives us an opportunity to reckon with ourselves and our own personal journeys and where we are in our relationship to race, in our roles and in our personal lives. And so this is a really, I think, an important space that we've carved out here for Together SC with Removing Our Blinders. Today's topic was a thought I had a few months ago about the season that we're in, this season of joy and celebration. We've just come through Halloween. Yes, we have come through Halloween, but Thanksgiving, hopefully many of you have had a great opportunity to share time with those you love over the Thanksgiving holiday. And now we're in the hot midst of holidays, depending on what you celebrate. We're in the midst of the holiday season. And hopefully you're having time to think about, things that are important to you and to your families and to those around you. But it also is a time we wear the hat in the sector about giving, right? It's the time where we are asking those around us to support the missions of the organizations, the people that we serve. We are asking, we're asking for donations. It's a big time for us. We just had Giving Day yesterday. Many of your organizations may have participated in the Giving Day in your community. And I know I came back from Thanksgiving break and found lots and lots of request letters in my mailbox from many of the organizations represented here today. So it's an important time, but in thinking about that, why I thought it would be important to have this conversation is to think about how we're asking for money and how do we avoid white saviorism in our fundraising efforts. As you see, my skin is white. Many of you on camera are white, and when you look at when you think about this, why do we do the work that we do? We have the privilege of having white skin and asking in a different way, but how do we avoid that and how we do our fundraising? And so I've had two amazing conversations, or a couple conversations with the two individuals we're going to talk to today about their personal journeys around giving, But their personal journey is just around racism and racial equity and how that impacts their work as leaders in their organization. So I'd like to introduce you to our two speakers for today, two friends. Both organizations are in Greenville, two of my favorite organizations. Lizzie Bebber is with United Ministries, an organization in Greenville, as I just said. She is a new, I think she would still consider herself a new executive director of this organization. She joined them literally on the brink or post-brink of COVID shutdown. I had the opportunity to meet her just a few weeks before COVID, so I did get to meet you in person, Lizzie, but then you came to the organization and you were in shutdown. Lizzie comes to us from Washington, D.C., and doing an executive leadership role there with an organization. I'm going to maybe forget the name of your organization, Christ House in Washington, D.C., but she comes to Greenville with a vast amount of experience. She's an ordained pastor as well, and we're going to learn a little bit about Lizzie today, maybe a lot about Lizzie today. Our other guest featured today is Mark Steenback. He is with Habitat for Humanity of Greenville County. Another favorite organization of mine, my husband, I told Mark, is on a build site today at Habitat, so I have a real personal connection. Mark is the Chief Resource Officer for Habitat. He's been there for more than 5 years. He comes with a wealth of nonprofit experience, having been with Miracle Hill Ministries, many of you may know that, a very large organization in the upstate of South Carolina, and now being with Habitat for a number of years in a variety of roles. And I think both of them, yesterday, as they were driving back from Columbia, they were at a press conference yesterday, and they were both driving back to Columbia. We were having this conversation, which could have gone on all day. So I am just delighted you're both here today to share those thoughts with the audience that we have in the room. So with that, I'd like each of them to have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about each of them, and tell us a little bit about your journey and your understanding and your personal journey around race. And I'd like to start with Lizzie, if that's okay. Lizzie, you can unmute yourself, and welcome to the Zoom room and removing our blinders.
Hi, thank you so much, Debbie. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. I am, as in thinking about this topic, there's certainly a lot to be said. And so I just want to start off by saying that I am not on this call because I have things figured out. I really see this as continuous work that we must start, that it's really lifelong work with deep roots from the very beginning of this country's origin. And so, as the director of this nonprofit and just working in nonprofits, I'm clear that much of the issues that we're working on and seeking to impact have roots of origin in racism. And so I just want to start off with that grounding. But as Debbie said, I moved here from Washington, D.C., but I'm actually originally from Mississippi, which is a big part of my own personal story. And a few things to share just in how I come to understand this topic of racism in my own life and in the life of the work that we're doing, as well as in the life of our community. Like Debbie said, I'm an ordained pastor by training. I was ordained in the Baptist church, by a church in Texas, but grew up in Mississippi in church. And I would say that so much of my identity early on, thinking about loving the poor, there was a narrative tied to that, quite honestly, as a white woman, as a white child, that poor often meant Black families. And so there was a real wiring that happened early on. And it wasn't until I left Mississippi and began getting deeper into the work of social services, but specifically coming in closer contact with communities of color and being in relationship and really in friendship, that I began to learn a different narrative. And so, as Debbie said, I was in DC at a place called Christ House, and much of my own development occurred by living in a community with mostly African-American men who were formerly homeless and most of whom were formerly incarcerated. Through those relationships, Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative often talks about we must get proximate to people and to issues. And so for me, it was through relationships with those men. Our family lived among them. And then later on, I became the executive director of that nonprofit. So I was living there and leading and having an opportunity to be in relationship as I learned to make decisions and as I learned what having power in decision making looks like. And so, so much of that experience has formed and shaped who I am today. And I would just say to you from the get-go that this is a topic that I wake up thinking about and I go to bed thinking about. And I think it is integral to the conversations we must be having in the work of fundraising as well as in the work of social services. So thanks for the opportunity to share personally, and I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thank you, Lizzie. And again, thanks to Debbie and the Together SC crew for putting this together and for inviting me. And I think just a lot like Lizzie said, in a lot of ways, I feel like I shouldn't be talking up here. I mean, I shouldn't be having this conversation because for me, it very much still is a journey. You know, you asked the question, what's your journey been like? I feel like that's what it is. Right. And, for me, I grew up here. I kind of joke I'm one of about 9 people left that actually grew up in Greenville. But growing up here, I was very much, sheltered from a lot of things. And just because of the way I was brought up and the opportunities I had, to be quite honest, just didn't have exposure to a lot of the issues around race and things like that. And so as I got older and got into nonprofit work and began working, Miracle Hill with the homeless and addiction recovery and things like that. And I started to recognize really quickly just that there was a deep disparity in terms of, the population and who we were serving and why, the people of color were overrepresented in my mind, and really started to form questions in my mind and wrestle with things that I hadn't before. And I think for me, probably one of the biggest things that's helped me was actually the opportunity when I came to Habitat. Many of you probably know, especially in the Greenville area, Gail PA, who's our VP of Strategic Initiatives. And because of my lack of exposure, and for me, it felt like it was kind of like this distant history thing, like racism was something that was dealt with back in the 60s and 70s, and it's not an issue now. And I just remember walking into Gail's office one day and sitting down with her. She's a 3rd generation Charlestonian, grew up in the South. Her family's been here a long time and's been through and seen a lot. And I just sat down with her and I said, help me understand it. What is that experience like? What does it look like? What am I missing? What's going on here? And just had some honest conversations with her about what her experience was growing up as a Black woman in corporate world, and all the different things and that she experienced and the things she saw, and how her family wrestled with those things, how she raised her grandson, and the way that she had to think differently about those sort of things, and as opposed to how I raised my children and my boys and the conversations that I had been having. So, so for me, it's been, that's what it's been, a lot of just asking questions and listening and being willing to be initially maybe even offended or felt, not being afraid to have my, lack of a better term, sensibilities offended at first, but being willing to wrestle with some really, really tough ideas and really tough conversations. And so that's been my journey, and I'm still on it. I'm very much still on it. For me, it's a constant battle to continue to pursue that. So I guess that's the very short answer to that.
Mark, I have to react to that and respond. I mean, I know Gail, and it's amazing that she was willing to share. How did you find that space? And I know you said you walked into her office.
Yeah.
And asked her, but sometimes that's the hardest part, I think, for us as white individuals, is to find someone to.
Well, I mean, like you said, if you know Gail's probably one of, outside of my mom and my wife and maybe my grandma, she is probably top 5 favorite women in my life. And, I consider her one of my closest friends for a lot of different reasons, but just her ability and willingness she provided that space and how graceful she was. So I think that was a lot of it. She fosters trust and in every conversation she has. So it wasn't hard to do that from the standpoint of her specifically. It was a little awkward in terms of some of the questions I was asking, but she was so graceful and wonderful in how she handled that.
Thanks for that. And Lizzie, you said you lived among a group of individuals that were part of your program. Were you able to have these kind of conversations with those individuals?
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned early on was that many of the men we were living among, it culturally and just as part of their experience, talking about these realities is a part of the dynamic. It's a part of the culture. And I learned as a white woman that we're taught to not talk about it and to be very good at avoiding it and ignoring it. And so I felt mentored by many of these men who helped me to become more comfortable with my own stuff, but also reckoning with it and getting down to the bottom of it. Where does this come from? Where are the origins? What's the story? And what are the narratives that I've been taught that I'm perpetuating? And how might we tell those differently? So absolutely.
And these are things that we didn't necessarily talk about beforehand, but it's bringing to mind. We stumble as white individuals. We stumble when we have these conversations, and we, as you said, we're not comfortable doing it. We've been taught not to do it. We do. How do you respond when you stumble?
Well, I'm not going to sit here and claim to have great expertise because, again, I'm learning, as many of us are, but I think it's sort of like learning how to walk. If you've had a child, they don't run right away. Well, maybe some of them do, but my children did not run right away. But it for some of us, it takes practice. It takes discomfort and a willingness. But honestly, what was a shift for me was that I knew that I loved the men that I worked with, and similar to the way that Mark talks about Gail, and they loved my children, and we were very close. And I knew that there was a story that I had learned from the very beginning of my life that needed to be retold. And so it's practice, it's education, it's constant reading, exercising opportunities for learning, I think is a big part of it, and really an intentionality of prioritizing this conversation, recognizing the importance that it plays in the topic that we're here to discuss today. So how racism shows up in my opinion, every facet of our work, and that includes fundraising.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, really, it's just I think growing up as an athlete and as a coach now, recognizing that when things are difficult, that means I'm doing something right. The easy way is never really the way that I want to go, because that means I'm not being challenged, I'm not growing, I'm not getting better. So to kind of, when you stumble, I kind of embrace it a little bit. I'm really good at it too, as far as stumbling goes. So I'm kind of used to that as well. So, but just leaning into it and embracing it and knowing that I feel that way because I'm missing something and I need something. I need to be challenged, or I need to grow, or I need to learn. So for me, those opportunities, I try to embrace them as learning opportunities.
Thank you. So these are your personal journeys and how you've gotten to where you are. You're both members of organizations that obviously serve people, and I think predominantly people of color. in your organizations. So tell me about the journey within Habitat. We could start with you, Mark. Like, tell us a little bit about that equity journey within your organization.
Sure. Again, I think for Habitat, it's still a journey. We still definitely are wrestling with it constantly. As far as the transition of why, I think you pointed it out already. One thing it's again very obvious. We predominantly serve people of color, and so after a while, why is this? What's going on? What's led to this, and that sort of thing. And so you begin to wrestle with and ask those questions. And so, one of the big things for me, especially as it came to fundraising and kind of transitioning the way we think about fundraising, was when I came to Habitat, the one thing that impressed me almost immediately was our families and how amazing and how strong and how capable they are. We serve predominantly people of color and predominantly single mothers with kids. And so I'm watching, the single mom hold down 2 jobs, raise 3 kids, go to her classes, get her hours in on the job, on the house, help build, do all these things, and get them done well. I mean, just killing it. And you just recognize that she didn't need rescue. She didn't need any of that. She just needed she needed the opportunity. She didn't have the opportunity that I had. And when that was provided for her, they take advantage of it. And so, for me, that has honestly been it, is watching our families, and how they take such full advantage of the opportunities in a lot of ways that probably, if they'd been given the opportunities I had, would have been more successful than I would have been. I'm constantly impressed by them, and I tell a lot of our families, especially the mothers, that they're an example to me, and I mean that they're absolutely an example to me of overcoming a lot and still being able to accomplish and fulfill dreams and goals and desires for their family.
Lizzie, how about you? Tell us a little bit about United Ministries' journey in this work.
Sure. So just a little bit, United Ministries is a social service organization in Greenville. We are in our 51st year and started off as basically a ministry of ministries. So churches that came together, congregations that said we can do more together than we can separately, and started by providing crisis services for poor folks. So rent and utility assistance and food. So that tells you a little bit about the origin. Over the years, we've certainly evolved. But I think when it comes specifically to fundraising, a couple things came to mind. One is, and I really say this to any of the directors on the call, or really anybody who has the authority and opportunity to influence what goes out about your work, is even when I first came to United Ministries, so I've only been here less than 2 years, and I began to ask the staff, who do we serve? Like who's coming to us? And they said, well, we serve anybody. I'm not comfortable with that statement. I think it's true that we do serve anybody, but when we look at our data, just wanted to share this reality because it's striking to me, and this is why I think we need to be more specific about who we're serving. In our last fiscal year, which ended in June 30th of 2021, 63% of our nearly 4,000 people we serve a year were African American, and 32% were white. In the most recent census report for Greenville County, which is the area that we serve, only 23% of the population that was counted was African American, and 70% was white. And so for me, who we're serving is an important answer to get specific about. Also, in the last year, 90% of the total number of people that we were serving, so over the 4,000 people, were living at 30% or below the average median income. So that's the federal poverty line. And so if you add that up, being very specific, I think in itself is a starting place. And then what is it that we are here to try to accomplish, and how is that done? How are the people that we're serving represented, especially in our narratives? And I know we're gonna talk about that in a minute. A couple of just practical things that we have done in recent years to try to change our fundraising model. One is that we have a luncheon every year. That's our big fundraiser. It's in the spring. And several years ago, we titled it Uniting for Change. And one of the decisions that was made was anytime we do this event, which is at the time, it was our only big fundraiser. Anytime we do that, we also commit that just as much as we focus on the fundraising aspect, we're going to focus on education about some aspect of our work that we want the community to know more about. And so knowing that so much of our work involves a focus around poverty, and then you look at the numbers in Greenville County of who is living in poverty demographically, that's an important conversation to get specific about as well. So this coming spring, we'll be hosting Brian Stevenson, who many of you may know is an African-American man who leads the Equal Justice Initiative, focuses much of his speaking on the roots of racism in this country and how they affect certain systems and disproportionately affect persons of color. So us inviting him alongside our fundraising model for that event has a very specific focus and purpose. So that's one example. Another one is opportunities to engage donors, and I'm speaking specifically about fundraising because that's a big part of this call. Yes, I'd be happy to send over the details of the event. And I hope that some of you can join us, by the way. But one of the things that we have done in the last year with COVID was that we did an informational panel called The Color of Incarceration, just recognizing that we have a number of clients who have that background. And again, much of the message that somebody like Brian Stevenson will give also has some similar themes. And then we've recently done 2 donor events. We invited our highest level donors and community stakeholders to come and learn about some of the research around poverty that we've been doing with the Riley Institute at Furman. It was not a solicitation event. It was purely an education and an invitation to those donors to come and learn why this research matters. And as we did that, we took the opportunity to be very specific about some of the data I started this response with, about who we're serving, where the demographics lie and why that's important to the conversation. So I just paint that picture because for me, any opportunity I can thread and very purposely put how racism shows up in the work that we are doing, I think is important. And it's a continual process. It's not something you just come in and blow up the whole system. I don't think, at least in our work, but it's something that we are continually planting the seeds and inviting people to learn more about.
Well, and Mark, I know that when we first started having this conversation, you talked about the shift at Habitat to the types of events, or maybe not as many events. So we just heard about some events that Lizzie's doing. Tell us a little bit about what Habitat's doing.
Yeah, similar to like Lizzie talked about, we're trying to focus more of our event, focus our one-on-one interaction with donors all the way up to our events to being more about informing and helping people understand what the issues are and answering the question of why we're in the situations we're in. And, for us at Habitat, we work in the affordable home ownership space and dealing with all of the different issues going back into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where all of the things that were done to keep the African American community and people of color out of the home ownership out of home ownership, and what that the generational impacts that has had. And the reason, a lot of times I think it's, people still believe, well, it just kind of happened, and it didn't happen. It was absolutely engineered. And so helping people to understand that the situation we're in now was not happenstance. It was engineered to be this way. And so, we want to share that. We want to get out of, our goal is to get out of the habit of talking about, this idea of helping people. I'm trying to think the way, the donors aren't, the donors' money doesn't help these individuals. It provides the opportunity for these individuals. And it's a little bit of a subtle shift, but it's a very important one in terms of helping people understand that you're not addressing deficiencies in the individual. You're addressing deficiencies in the system. You're addressing deficiencies in our society. And so that's a lot of what we've tried to do in terms of how we communicate individually with our donors. And again, in those events, as being able to share, a lot of what Lizzie's talked about. We share, the demographics of those that we serve, and the reasons why that is, and talking about those sort of things. So yeah, it's very similar in terms of what we're trying to do is be more educational with our donors.
So I love what both of you have shared, and Lizzie in particular, you had some really great, rich data that you've invested in, and you've complemented with other data that's out there. And I know Habitat does that as well. So that's sort of the big picture. But how do we really humanize this, and how do we really tell the stories? Because to me, and that's part of what I love doing is storytelling and hearing the stories. But how do you do that in a way that's sensitive to this idea of white saviorism, and how do we develop stories that are really impactful to your work? Lizzie, I don't know if you want to start, or Mark, go ahead, Lizzie.
Okay. Well, I was just going to sort of give a sigh and also just say, man, it's hard and it's thick, and we've got this conditioning and how we talk about the work that I'd say many of us have at least been taught. And I'm speaking from the white experience. I also just want to recognize, thank you for those of you who are representing as persons of color on this call. I want to just, I'm grateful that you're a part of this conversation. And I would start off always by saying that the perspective that I come from is what I know, and I can't speak for anyone other than that. So I don't want to represent that in a way that I claim to understand. I think I love that word humanizing, Debbie, because I think that's where it starts. And how do we give our donors an opportunity to see their fellow community members as if they are sitting at the same table, at the same level across from one another, looking eye to eye? That's really part of the goal, is giving the opportunity to set that stage. Going back to this idea around the narratives that we tell. I think one thing that's out there right now in a lot of the materials about fundraising is who is the hero of the story, and making sure that the clients that we're serving, and particularly thinking about that representation, that they are always the heroes, and that the voice and the framing and even just the story that we're painting. I was at a nonprofit previously that the founder would often write letters about the poor, destitute, homeless man who also happened to be Black. And I have to tell you, that's not the narrative that I want to perpetuate, because that's actually not the man that I've met in this work. I've met highly resilient and intelligent and witty and strong and kind men who have been through a lot, not all of which was their fault, but because of a system that preyed on their lives. And so how do we change that narrative in a way that represents them differently? Also, where can we give those clients the opportunity to have their own voice represented? One thing we do anytime we are going to start a relationship with a client, we have so much of our work is confidential because of the sensitivity of the issues that we're working through, but we have a sheet that we go through, standard, how do you feel about having your picture taken? How do you feel about being interviewed about, various things? And certainly people don't have to participate in that. But what we found is actually there are clients who want to participate in that, who want to be able to share their story and want others to know, but they want it from their own perspective. They want to be able to share their own voice. And I have to say, they do so much a better job than I do trying to craft it as if I was them. I think beyond that, it's really looking at kind of doing an audit of how are we telling stories, who's represented, what pictures are we using, and what is the story that we're telling with the pictures? Again, going back to the narratives that we're perpetuating. The last thing I would just say is just thinking about ways to elevate the voices of clients. We have had former clients as board members, as well as we currently have a former client who is also an African-American woman who has now come on our staff. And so what are ways that we can be more intentional about creating space and intentionality to change who is at the table and how their voices are represented?
Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about how Habitat does this?
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna. I feel like it'll be a lot of repetitive stuff, but I think that's, I think much like Lizzie, for us, it's about giving our families the opportunity and the choice to what they communicate, right? I was thinking about, a lot of times when you're trying to, we write family bios about every family. And so I know there's a temptation a lot of times for us to go into those and think, okay, what do we need to tell the donor so that they're going to get, involved with this family? And instead of what we do now, what we should have been doing all along is, what does this donor want to tell the family, or what does the family want to tell the donor? What does this mother want to communicate to those that are potentially going to support her and her family's journey towards home ownership? And so, we do that in a lot of different ways. I think, again, we elevate them from the standpoint of, again, they don't need help. They don't need rescue. They need opportunity. So talking about that, giving them the choice, like I said, how their story is told, what do they want to say? At the end of the day, I mean, they're the subject matter experts. Like Lizzie said, they're the ones that have lived the experience. I have not. And so I'm not going to be able to communicate it nearly as effectively as they are. And so extracting myself from the process and allowing myself to be a conduit for the communication, as opposed to, again, in some ways, I'm the champion or the savior of the client. That's not it at all. That's not it at all. So, and to Lizzie's point, we have a homeowner that's on our board. That's really important. Another way that we elevate them, especially in our advocacy work, is we get to go to DC and we take a homeowner with us. And I can tell you, my favorite thing about that trip is walking in, sitting down with these staffers or with these representatives, introducing the homeowner and shutting up and letting them tell the story. Giving them, here's the platform. Habitat has gotten us here. Habitat has provided this opportunity. You need to tell your story to this person so that they can hear that. And so, again, as much as possible, just allowing our platform, the work that we do, whatever notoriety we have within the community, simply using that as an opportunity to give voice to these families that we serve. And so that's really what we want to do. Miss Sonia Gooseby, one of my favorite homeowners, she's just a good friend. She's a homeowner. She's awesome. lovely lady, just being able to take her to DC and tell her story. We got Ruben Alvarez. I mean, every time I call him, it's like he picks up the phone and he's like, yes, like he already knows why I'm calling. You know, do you want to talk to this? He just starts with yes. And so, and it's awesome. And not all clients have that. We have some clients that don't want to, that, you know, some families don't want to talk at all. And that's awesome as well. And we don't want to, we don't want to step over that line either. So it's allowing the ones that want to communicate and letting them voice it the way that they want to voice it, and really extracting ourselves from it.
One of the things I've observed being a volunteer at Habitat, and just bringing in a personal experience, is, you know, you have the individuals that are the homeowners to be, that have the sweat equity component of work. So you're lucky in that a lot of your volunteers and potential donors have that ability to get to know the people that at a real human level. And I will also say that we receive postcards very often in the mail thanking us, individually handwritten notes from people that are being beneficiaries of the volunteerism that is coming out of Habitat. So that's a unique, you know, model. I don't know, Lizzie, do you have anything similar that you can pull on? Because I know a lot of organizations don't have that model. So is there anything other ways that you have been able to do some of this engagement with the people that you're serving?
We do not know. We don't currently do that, although that's a great idea. So something to think about.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. You know, each nonprofit that's represented in this call has different challenges in how they are able to interact with, you know, their donors as well as with the people that they're serving. So I think that's pretty unique. So let's talk about how do you approach the topic of race and fundraising? Do you approach it, or how do you approach it? I don't know who wants to start on that one. That's a really challenging question.
Well, I'll just say that the note I wrote myself under that question is that I was telling Debbie about this yesterday. Actually, we had this event recently for a group of our highest donors, and I was going to introduce the research and the researcher that we had invited to come and speak for us. And one of our staff members said to me, that's all well and good, and people are certainly here for the research, but Lizzie, you need to get up and actually tell why this matters to you, and talk about why this work matters to you, why this specific research matters. You need to get personal about it. And that's a real, that was a real marker for me, a moment when I think about the role of being the CEO or the director or whatever the position is of influence that you have. Where are the opportunities where we can show up and get specific about why this matters? So that would be the first thing I would say, whether it's the letter that I write at the end of the year to all of our donors, and making sure that I am thoughtful about the narrative and opportunity to really have the audience captured. What are the most important things I want them to hear? Or it's looking at really shifting how we talk about the challenges that our clients face and where those challenges come from. And as Mark was saying, when people are given opportunity, I would also use the word access, things like access to cash, to financial opportunities, to resources that they maybe have not been given the opportunity to participate in prior. Finding ways to represent that and show the power of that when people have those opportunities. So I think I'll punt to Mark from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I noted under that question was, don't hide from it. You know, I think kind of like was alluded to early on, I think, you know, the natural instinct a lot of times is that's uncomfortable, or I don't know what to say, you know, or whatever it is. I don't have the experience, or it doesn't feel right, or I'm concerned about how I might get exposed. And so the self-protection is we hide from it. We don't talk about it. And so I think the first thing for me is just being honest about it. For a lot of times for us, that comes through educating our donors, like we've talked about the reasons why the situation is what it is. And at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, the reasons are because there were some really, really terrible things done through legislation, through all kinds of different ways to leverage the African-American community out of home ownership. That's reality. So let's just be honest about that. Let's recognize that that's the reason why Habitat exists in large part is because of that. And that's unfortunate, but what can we do about it going forward? So I think that's probably one of the bigger things. I think another big thing, and I've seen this example from our CEO Monroe several times, is just a willingness to push back on donors. I'm so thankful for him, being able to be able to serve under him and to learn from him and work with him. He very recently, actually, with on our capital campaign, had a donor. We're talking about a pretty significant gift, takes him out to the site, and this donor just starts spouting off all of the reasons why these people are in this situation. And Monroe very easily could have just kind of let it go or whatever, but he didn't. He pushed back on it. He challenged this person. He flat out told the person where he was wrong. He was willing to just stand up and confront it. And when you're in fundraising and you got numbers to hit, that's risky. And that makes that adds another layer to it. But but seeing that example and that willingness to be able to understand and just understand there's some people that aren't going to align with your mission. That's okay. There's more people out there, and in the long term, the individuals that you want, the donors that you want, then supporters you want are the ones that do align with your organization. So very thankful for his in that situation, for Monroe's example of being able to do that. But that's my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful, because I know that that's a big challenge in fundraising, and how we, avoid these conversations often in order to achieve our goals. So, which kind of leads to the last question, which I know is probably the hardest one when we were talking yesterday. But how does race impact fundraising? Lizzie's smiling because I know we've sort of challenged each other on this question. But do either of you have a response to that?
I had a couple thoughts about it. And again, kind of like you alluded to, I present this humbly and in a stumbling way of just really trying to wrestle with this and wrestle through this. But for me, how does it impact it? I think the one thing it says, when we allow space, when we allow the space to discuss and deal with the issues of race in our fundraising, it provides the opportunities to deal with and put to death some of those prejudice that have been perpetuated and around those people or poor people or whatever it is. And so and if we're not careful, if we aren't honest about why and who we serve, then on the other side is true. We are perpetuating it. We are perpetuating those prejudice, and we have to stop. We have to stop that. But I think when we're honest and authentic about the impact that racism has had on communities especially communities of color, and specifically for us in our space, and I think most spaces, but specifically in ours, we continue to attract the donors that will support us more than financially. Again, as a fundraiser, that's important for me to get the money, but I need to be attracting people that are going to support us, not just financially, but they're going to support us in the community. They're going to support us in how we communicate our message. They're going to support our families. They're not going to support me. They're going to support those families. That's what I'm after, that they're going to take up the cause of those families. And so I think, my final thought was just that when you have that prejudice giving, it excludes relationship. And that's the antithesis of what you're trying to do in good development work. You're trying to build relationships. So again, that's kind of my tripping over myself thoughts around it, but that's what I'd come up with.
Well, Mark, I'll just trip behind you. Yeah, it's how I started this conversation. I think it's in every facet of our existence, and just recognizing that and owning it is, I think, very important. I think one of the things I most enjoy about fundraising is we're not just giving people an opportunity to make a financial investment. We're giving them an opportunity to be educated, to connect with the work, yes, to support us and to make our work possible, as many of us often say. But really, it's going back to that opportunity to help folks get proximate. And at least in my experience, the opportunity to humanize other, whether it's a person of a different race, a different gender, a different life circumstance. There's a lot of otherness in our community, but specifically talking racially, especially being in the South. I think we have a particular history that requires us to, and really we're obligated, I think, to authentically name and reckon with that part of our identity. So where we can have opportunities in fundraising to engage donors, whether it's an educational opportunity, it's a meal over coffee to talk about why this work matters to us, why we show up every day, and why it matters to the donor. And what are they thinking about, and what are they wondering about? I've had some of the richest experiences sitting across the table from someone who also was in the midst of learning and really being deeply affected by the work. And a lot of it came down to having an opportunity to be in relationship in a way that they may not have otherwise found themselves in. And that's just the facts of the way that our society is set up. So I think as leaders, we have a particular opportunity to invite that. Our donors trust us. They have given, especially those who've been with us, many of them, we have relationships with, as Mark was saying. And so we have a particular window of opportunity that maybe we may be some of the only folks that have that, because when people put their money in something, that has its own level of relationship. And so really getting specific about why these things matter. So I think that is, Debbie, I'm sure I have a lot more I could say about that, but I think I'll.
Well, wow. This is this goes beyond my wildest dreams when I thought about this conversation and invited the two of you to be here today. We do have one question from the audience. Would you be willing to take a question? They say it depends how hard it is. Jen, I opened the mic to Jen. Do you have a question?
I do, thank you. I'm Jennifer Waller, the new membership manager here at Together SC. I'm also new to the South. I lived in Colorado for most of my life, and that's a whole nother story. So I have just to say, though, that I have a lot to learn, because the culture here is much different than what I'm used to. I have about maybe 5 or 6 years of fundraising experience. And so my question is around how we frame things to the donor, meaning I was taught, and I think it's still the mentality, that in your thank you letters, in your appeal letters, in your communications to donors, you're supposed to make it about them. And so, donor, look at what you did. Donor, thank you so much. You're the best. And so instead of, you're supposed to take the focus off of the organization and look at all the things that we did and the impact that we had and all of our outputs and accomplishments and things like that, and say, donor, this is what you're doing, and really focus it on the donor. So my question is that do you two think that perpetuates this sort of hero and savior complex when we're making it about the donor, and it kind of amplifies this idea that the donor is the one that making the donor feel good about how much they're helping and saving the world and being the savior in this situation. Do you?
It can be. And I think that goes back to that subtle shift of what are you thanking them for? Are you thanking them for rescuing that person? Or are you thanking them for giving that person the opportunity to do what they were capable of all along? I think you can still do that, but again, it's very, very subtle. And I think that's the key, that there's something about fundraising that makes it really easy to get in that ditch. And so you're going to have to constantly be battling and thinking through, one of the things we do on our development staff is any appeal letter, any thank you letter, anything like that. I mean, we all look at it and we're all trying to filter it, because it doesn't matter who writes it or where it comes from. Like you said, I mean, the training in the background is for most of us it comes from that savior standpoint. And so we have to really, really, really work hard. But I think you can do both. It's just a matter of what you're thanking them for.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think much of it can be very subtle, but it's important to look even at the subtleties. Just going back again to what is the narrative that we're perpetuating? How are we painting the picture about the individuals that we're talking about? Whose voice is that in? And I think you can still be grateful. Of course, someone investing their finances in this work, well, that's how this works. That's how our budgets are made. And it's complicated, and it's there are certainly funders that give us their money and probably have very, very different ways of seeing the world. And we still take the money to a certain extent. I do think that I certainly know of colleagues who have chosen to not partner with a donor because the line in the sand got drawn. And I think that goes back to what Mark said. We're not everybody's person. We're not everybody's organization, and that's okay. We don't need to try to be that. We need to try to be most true to ourselves and the work and the people that we're representing, and really to look to find the folks that want to be a part of that. So I do think being honest about what we're here to do and why, but I think you can couple that with gratitude. Absolutely. I don't think it takes away from how much we appreciate the donor. I just think that the focus of that communication can be shifted.
Well, thank you. What a great way to conclude today's session. Again, I thank Mark and Lizzie for being so vulnerable and sharing and reckoning with this very challenging topic in a very open way. I think you gave a lot of great ideas and tips about how you personally have reckoned with this, but also how your organizations are looking at fundraising in a different way, and some things to start and try and do. We know we all have a long way on this journey. And thank you for being so vulnerable about that as well. I think that at the very start of this conversation, you both shared that with me and said, am I the right person? I said, you're absolutely the right folks to be discussing this, because you are able to tell us about that journey that's so important that we all need to get on and stay the course. And we can make small steps to get there. So thank you today for being here, everyone. Thank you for joining Removing Our Blinders. We have another great session coming up in January on the 5th. With Beth DeSantis and with Dr. Rena Dixon from Fact Forward. And again, give us a round of applause for Lizzie and Mark for spending their time with us today. And we just so much appreciate you as members of Together SC and sharing this time with us. But thank you all. So have a great day. Sign up for the summit. Go register. Go look at what we're offering in March. And we look forward to seeing you online soon and in person in March in Spartanburg. Thank you, everyone.